Hello everyone, welcome to the new episode of Skeletal Bone series. Today we are going to study about one of the most important bones of the forearm, that is the radius. Firstly, we can study about the anatomical position and the side determination of this bone. So, the anatomical position of radius. The radius has a head, a shaft and a lower end. The head should be pointed upwards and the lower end downwards with the styloid process distally and laterally. The radial tuberosity or bicipital tuberosity should be pointed medially and the ulnar notch also pointed medially, so that we can say that this radius is the radius of the right forearm. The upper end of the radius consists of three parts. They are the disc-shaped head, the neck as well as the radial tuberosity. The disc-shaped head has a superior surface. You can see that the superior surface is concave. This surface has an articular cartilage and it articulates with the capitulum of the humerus. Then the neck and then the radial tuberosity. The radial tuberosity or the bicipital tuberosity is where the bicipital tendon gets inserted. The bicipital tendon actually gets attached to the posterior rough surface of the bicipital tuberosity, while the anterior smooth surface gives attachment to the synovial bursa. The next part of the bone is the shaft. Now, talking about the shaft, it has three margins and three surfaces. The first margin is the anterior margin. As we see, the anterior margin extends from the anterior margin of the bicipital aponeurosis and downwards to the styloid process. The anterior margin, the upper part of the anterior margin is an oblique line. It is also called the anterior oblique line. The anterior oblique line gives the origin for the flexor digitorum superficialis. The medial margin. It is also called the introitious margin. The lower 3/4 of the introitious margin gives attachment to the introitious membrane, which connects the radius to the ulna. Now about the posterior margin. It is well marked in its middle third, and we can see that the upper and lower parts are quite vague. The upper part of the posterior margin is called the posterior oblique line. The shaft of the radius has three surfaces. The surface between the anterior margin of the radius and the medial or introitious margin is called the anterior surface. The upper 3/4 of the anterior surface gives origin to the flexor pollicis longus, and the lower 1/4 gives attachment to the pronator quadratus. The most important feature of the anterior surface is the nutrient foramen. It is an upwardly directed foramen. So this is the nutrient foramen. Now about the posterior surface. The posterior surface lies between the medial or introitious margin and the posterior margin. The posterior surface gives rise to the abductor pollicis longus from its middle third and the extensor pollicis brevis from the distal part, that is the part below the abductor pollicis longus. The last surface is the lateral surface. It lies between the anterior border and the posterior border. The supinator muscle is inserted into the upper third of the lateral surface and the pronator teres muscle is inserted into the middle third. Now we are going to discuss about the lower end of the radius. The lower end of the radius is characterized by its expanded nature and it has 5 surfaces and the styloid process. Now about the surfaces. The first surface is the anterior surface. It is a thick prominent ridge and it can be palpated even through the overlying tendons. So the radial pulse is felt on the lateral end of the anterior surface, that is lateral to the flexor carpi radialis. Then we are going to discuss about the posterior surface. The posterior surface is characterized by 4 grooves and a prominent Lister's tubercle. It is also called the dorsal tubercle. The tendon of the extensor pollicis longus produces an oblique groove medial to the Lister's tubercle, and lateral to the Lister's tubercle there is a groove which is vaguely divided into 2 parts, and through the medial part there is the extensor carpi radialis brevis, and through the lateral part there is the extensor carpi radialis longus. There is a groove medial to the extensor pollicis longus for the passage of the tendons of extensor digitorum and extensor indicis. Then about the medial surface. This is the medial surface. It presents the ulnar notch through which the radius articulates with the ulna at the inferior radio-ulnar joint. Now about the lateral surface of the lower end. It is crossed by the abductor pollicis longus tendon and the extensor pollicis brevis tendon, which passes superiorly and inferiorly respectively. The brachioradialis tendon is inserted into the lower end of the lateral surface. Now about the inferior surface. This is the inferior surface. The inferior surface has a lateral triangular area and a medial rectangular area for articulation. The lateral triangular area articulates with the scaphoid bone, and the medial rectangular area articulates with the lateral part of the lunate bone.